Hello everyone, and on behalf of the Mindalia.com team, welcome. Today Elena Perea is joining us to tell us about sodium and calcium in the aging process and the ideal diet. Let's talk a bit about her. Elena Perea. She's a nutritional therapist specialized in optimizing the digestive and immune system and in the prevention and treatment of candidiasis and thyroid problems. So now let's not delay these any further and let's say welcome to Elena. Hello Elena, how are you?
Hello, Dalia. Hello. How are you? Thank you for having me here and this opportunity.
Thank you very much for sharing this space with us. I'm really glad to have you here, and now I'm prepared for listening to you. So, whenever you want, Elena, you can start with this conversation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're going to talk today about the sodium and calcium in the aging process and the ideal diet. These are three very different concepts that may be a little bit confusing to begin with, because we are not familiar with sodium and calcium. We maybe not know how the aging process begins. We don't know how this can relate to the ideal diet. So that's why I'm going to explain these three different concepts separately, and then we're going to see how they relate. So first, we're going to talk about the macro minerals, which are sodium, calcium, potassium, and magnesium. These are minerals in contrast to the microminerals that are needed in big amounts. That means we need a greater amount of the macrominerals because they have a major role in health and the major functions of the metabolism. So we know about the microminerals because they are needed in micro amounts. The microminerals are the most famous ones are zinc and iron and manganese and chromium. These are minerals that have specific functions, but comparing to the macrominerals, they have a very different roles. The macrominerals are like the ones that are ruling the whole of the metabolism. They have a major impact in health, and they are important because they are required in significant quantities. A significant quantity means 100 milligrams or more. In the case of potassium, it is needed we need to consume from 5,000 to 6,000 milligrams per day. So this means we need a big amount of macrominerals. But we are used to seeing diet as in terms of complying with our requirements. So the macrominerals, we don't need that much. But with the macrominerals, it's not so important how much we are obtaining from diet, but it's important that they are in the correct balance. So here we're talking about a team of minerals, and we are talking about how they can be in a balance, in equilibrium with each other. That's the main thing. So that's why it's very easy to have an imbalance of these macrominerals instead of a deficiency. We're not going to talk about deficiency. We're going to talk about balance and equilibrium. And that's how the diet influences this balance. So to explain the macrominerals, we're going to talk about their functions in the body. We said it's sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. And they are responsible for maintaining an inner environment in the cell. That means if we have the proper balance of the macrominerals, the cell is going to have a proper environment in which a wide range of chemical changes can occur. And this is very important for the cell vitality, for the energy of the cell, and for the cell to be able to absorb nutrients and to get rid of toxins. So the macrominerals are going to give the cell the right environment. They're going to maintain the osmotic pressure of the body fluids. So they control the movement of water. in and out of cells and tissues. So they are important for the cell energy, and they are important for the water movement. So they might have something to do with fluid retention, with feeling bloated if they're not in balance. They also maintain the ionic strength of the body fluids and the structural and properties of the proteins. So this is another major role. They have something to do with the tissues, with the muscles, with the nerves as well. And they control the sensitivity of nerves and muscles. And specifically, the calcium and magnesium perform a structural role conferring hardness. This is also very important because hardness has something to do with the aging process. So we have something that controls body fluids, controls hardness, and controls the energy of the cell. And it controls it in a major level. It controls it when it's in balance. When the macrominerals are not in balance, all these things go out of control. And magnesium especially has a role as a catalyst. So it's very important for the energy of the cell. So when we talk about macrominerals, and I'm talking again sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, we're not talking about requirements, we're talking about concentrations. So the relative concentration are crucial to the normal functioning of the processes of the cell and of the energy of the cell. To control the levels of the minerals is very important because, as I said, it's not so much how much magnesium we've got, how much calcium we've got, or how much sodium or potassium. What is important is where they are located. If they are located outside the cell or inside the cell. That's the main important thing. So we have two pumps in the cell. What they do is they get rid of sodium and they let potassium in, or they get rid of toxin. These are called the sodium and potassium pump and the calcium pump. And this mechanism was created to pump sodium out of the cell because that's what it needs to be. Sodium needs to be outside the cell, and potassium needs to be inside the cell. The same with calcium. Calcium needs to be outside the cell, and magnesium is used to give energy to these pumps. So this is part of the evolution of the human cells, is the evolution of life on Earth, because all life emerged from the sea, and the sea is very high in sodium. So we needed to evolve, we needed to get the sodium out of the cells, otherwise the cells will become full of water, and with water the cell can't function. So if we get rid of sodium, we get rid of the water inside the cell, so the cell can survive and can evolve. So we've always been dependent on this mechanism, which pumps sodium out of the cell and lets minerals and potassium in. So as I said, it is very important to keep sodium and calcium outside the cell. And this is the main thing. And this is a key concept to understand what the ideal diet is and how important it is, the levels of these major minerals. Okay, so we need to keep these two minerals out, sodium and calcium. And we need potassium inside, so we need a lot of potassium. Potassium can enter the cell. And we need a lot of magnesium because we need magnesium to pump these macrominerals. So we need magnesium for energy. We need potassium to keep it outside the cell. So as I said, the requirement for the macrominerals are not important. The important thing is their balance that matters. But anyway, we have very high requirements. For example, we need between 0.5 gram and 1 gram of sodium. We need potassium, we need 3 to 5 grams. And calcium, we need around 300 milligrams. Magnesium, we need around 300 milligrams. But the main thing is that potassium needs to be 6 times higher than sodium in the diet. So if we are consuming one gram of sodium, we are going to need 6 grams of potassium. But if our diet is giving us, let's say, 3 grams of sodium, then we will need 6 times more potassium. So a normal diet, in a normal modern diet, is very rarely that it has half a gram of sodium in it. Normally it contains from 5 to even 15 grams of sodium. Any diet in which we are adding salt, or we are consuming any type of processed foods, or foods that are high in salt. So it's very, very easy that our diets are a lot higher in sodium than in potassium. So now that we sort of understand how the macrominerals work, that they have a major role, that we need big amounts, that they need to be in balance, and that we need to keep these two major macrominerals outside the cell, which is calcium and sodium. Now I'm going to talk about the aging process. And the aging process implies normally a hardening of tissues, of muscles and tissues. And remember that calcium is very important for the hardening of the tissues, because calcium confers hardness in the bones, and when it's outside the bones, in the tissues. Another thing that is part of the aging process is the wrinkles and white hair, and the rigidity and the slowing of the metabolism, the slowing of the cell energy. So a lower energy, a hardening, and wrinkles and white hair. So now we're going to see how this relates to these macrominerals. So with any diet, no matter how healthy it is and how organic, wherever, we normally have an excess of salt and excess of sodium. So what happens when we have a sodium excess? So these are a list of symptoms that are related and that to sodium excess, and that are telling us that our body is starting to accumulate sodium inside the cell. So if we start to accumulate sodium, we're going to have some symptoms. But if this keeps on going, when we get to a later age, when we are in our 60s, 70s, we're gonna start having symptoms of excess sodium, which we may think this is just part of the aging process, when in fact it's just that our bodies are accumulating too much sodium and have been doing so for a long time. So if we start to have symptoms of excess sodium, we may have premenstrual tension, we may have irritability, we may have headaches, we may have bloatedness or fluid retention, as I said, because this has something to do with sodium. We will have swelling and puffiness of the ankles, but we may also have premature wrinkles and premature white hair. This is another symptom of sodium excess. Greasy hair and dandruff as well, and frequent colds, runny nose, and desire for salty foods. Also, heavy periods is another symptom, because our body is trying to get rid of excess sodium, and it does so with the fluids in the body. So the menstruation in women is a way to get rid of sodium, because sodium leaves our body with fluids, either menstruation, it could be tears or sweat. So if we feel that we have some of these symptoms, like premenstrual tension, heavy periods, water retention, well, we may start thinking that maybe our body is not being able to get rid of sodium. And in the long term, this may lead to premature aging. So the problem with the macrominerals in comparison to the macrominerals in comparison to the microminerals, is that if we have a micromineral deficiency, maybe zinc deficiency or iron deficiency, this is very easy to solve. We just need to take a pill, we just need to take a supplement, and maybe in 1-2 months this deficiency has been solved. But with the macrominerals imbalance, it's not so easy to solve because it develops over the years, and it also takes years to correct. So once a person has been sodiumized, which means their bodies are starting to be too high in sodium, is normally very difficult to reverse this process, and it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of time. So it's better to prevent. It's better to stop it as soon as we realize this is happening. And then we have the problem with calcium. Calcium is another mineral which is too high in a normal diet, either because we've been consuming dairy products, which are very, very high on calcium, but also calcium is omnipresent in foods. It's very difficult to find foods that are low in calcium. Most foods are very high in calcium. I mean, vegetables are high in calcium, fish, nuts, cereals, they have good levels of calcium. And if we add to this that a lot of people consume dairy products, then we have a diet which is also very, very high on calcium. And when you have a high sodium diet and a diet which is high in calcium, you start having a problem which is called calcium mishandling. This means that we are not being able to handle calcium, and it's not going to the bones. Instead, it's getting deposited in soft tissue. We might have osteoporosis, we may have osteopenia, we may be losing calcium in the bones, but at the same time we're having a hardening of muscles, hardening of tissues, maybe hardening of arteries. The muscles become hardened, and this may cause arthrosis or rheumatic type stiffness. So this is the problem with calcium. It's not so much deficiency, it's a problem of mishandling, not being able to absorb calcium in bones, and having calcium being deposited in soft tissue, which is another symptom of the aging process. So the old age tissue hardening happens earlier in life when we have calcium mishandling. The extra calcium cannot be incorporated into bone, and it cannot be excreted because it's not so easy to excrete calcium from the body. So it gets deposited in muscle, giving rise to a state of constant muscle contraction. So we have diseases of the advancing age, which can be osteoporosis, arthrosis. We may have stiffness, muscle contraction, kidney and gallbladder stones, which are made of calcium. We may have artheriosclerosis, which is a hardening of the arteries. So this is also very dangerous to be having a hardening of tissues. So what should we do then? We are seeing that we have to be especially cautious with sodium and calcium. So what we need to do to stop this process of aging, we have to eliminate excess sodium from the diet. We have to increase the intake of potassium. We have to increase the intake of magnesium, and we have to reduce the intake of calcium and calcium supplements. In the Chinese medicine, sodium is considered to be more yang, and sodium-rich foods as well, and potassium is considered to be more yin. And we need to have a ratio, the ideal ratio in between yin and yang, for which is considered to be more healthy, is 5:1. That means a 5 ratio, 5 a level of 5 potassium to 1 of sodium, or maybe 3 times potassium versus 2 times sodium. This is the correct balance for life. And in a normal diet, in a diet that we all follow, if we go to a restaurant or if we buy processed foods, we're gonna have maybe 9 times more potassium than sodium. So we are completely reversing this ideal ratio. So we normally are eating 9 times more sodium than potassium, when it should be the other way around. So this is extreme abuse of the sodium and potassium mechanisms. So modern diets, no matter what diet we're talking about, I mean, it could be the most healthy diet, vegetarian, vegan, it could be organic or nicely prepared. But if we're using salt in it, and if we are not being careful with the magnesium and calcium and the level of potassium, we may be distorting the sodium to potassium ratio. So what we need to do is to correct this. We need to have a diet which is very high on potassium, and now we're going to see which foods are high on potassium. We need to be careful that we're not getting removing the potassium in food by cooking it. And we have to be very careful not to use salt and other high sodium foods or substances. So when do we find a high sodium diet? When we are using salt in cooking. And this is very important, that we don't use any salt, because some people think maybe Himalayan salt is better, or maybe sea salt is better because it has some minerals in it. No matter what salt we use, it's always going to be high on sodium. And in this ideal diet, which is natural and in harmony with our cellular processes, we need to eat very, very little sodium, not more sodium than the natural foods are giving us. So there's no need to add sodium to our foods. The natural foods in the normal state, they have the perfect level of sodium, which is always less than the level of potassium. So if we pick up a tomato or cucumber or any vegetables or fruits, the level of sodium is going to be always lower than the level of potassium, because that's the ideal ratio for life. So if whenever we add salt to cooking or preparing foods, we are reversing this ratio. We are changing the natural ratio in nature. We not only have added salt in cooking, but we have added salt in all processed foods, including biscuits, ice cream, meal substitutes, veggie burgers, and so on. We have sodium in additives as monosodium glutamate. Baking powder is very high on sodium. Any cured products are high on sodium, either salmon or ham or any cured products. We also have very high sodium on stock cubes, gravy powder, canned foods, packed soups, and many meat products contain hydrolyzed protein, which is also very high on sodium. So this is in terms of reducing the sodium intake, but we also need to make sure our levels of potassium are very, very high. And they, as I say, they should be 6 times higher than our levels of sodium. So we need to eat foods which are high on potassium, which could be root vegetables, tomatoes, cucumbers, aubergines, all the foods, peppers, they're also very high on potassium. And we need to make sure we're not losing potassium by cooking, because another important problem is not only that we're not eating enough potassium, but that we are losing potassium through some cooking techniques. But it's not only cooking that makes you lose potassium in foods, but also there's a lot of situation that cause losses of potassium, which could be diuretic drugs, alcohol consumption as well. Coffee drinking makes you lose potassium, and this is also very important. And people I don't think they realize that coffee is not only that it's it makes you nervous, but it also makes you lose potassium. And this is very crucial nowadays, because normally our diets are not, they don't have enough potassium. So excess sugar intake as well makes you lose potassium. Low blood sugar levels as well, magnesium deficiencies, and the use of laxatives and aspirins. Aspirins is a drug that makes you lose potassium, especially if you take it in a daily basis. So we should not only eliminate the excess sodium in the diet, but also avoid practices and lifestyle factors that affect the macrominerals. And one important thing is the consumption of milk and dairy products. Dairy products are not only very high on sodium, but also they encourage the loss of potassium from the cell, and they encourage the accumulation of sodium. And this is very interesting, because dairy products and milk is a food, or a non-food, because it's not really a food, that was designed for the babies of any animal. And the thing here is the milk is designed for a baby, and a baby has a different cellular environment than an adult. And the cells in the baby are high on sodium. It's the only time in life when we need sodium to be inside the cell, because we've just came out of the womb. And in the womb, we had a high sodium watery environment. It's like the sea, similar to what the sea could be. So we have a process of getting rid of sodium, but for some months, maybe the first 9 months of life, we need that sodium inside the cell. So that's what the milk and the dairy products do. They maintain the sodium inside the cell. So they're not only high on sodium, but they also make you retain sodium inside the cell. So that's the main problem of milk drinking and eating dairy products, that they favor this accumulation of sodium, and they favor the calcium mishandling. That's why it doesn't help to drink milk or take dairy products when you have osteoporosis, because although they give you some calcium, they don't help that the calcium is handled properly. They make the calcium be more difficult to handle, because the cell is losing energy. It doesn't have enough energy to keep calcium aside, so that affects the bone. So what we should be thinking of foods in terms of how natural they are, because if they're how nature designed them to be, they're going to have the right ratio of sodium and potassium, calcium and magnesium. A food like milk or dairy products is not a natural food for an adult to eat. But also animal derived foods such as meat or fish or eggs, they're also high on sodium. So if we eat too many of that, if we eat too much animal protein, we're also favoring the accumulation of sodium and calcium. So our diet needs to be focused mainly on plant-derived foods, vegetarian or vegetables, because they have the proper balance of the macrominerals. So now we're going to talk about the ideal diet. I've explained the macrominerals and how the aging process is related to the macrominerals. So what we think of the ideal diet, well, some people think of the ideal diet as the diet which is more appropriate for humans to eat. Some people think it's vegetarian or vegan because we are not designed to eat. Our teeth are not designed to chew meat. Some people think it's paleo diet is the right diet because it's what we have eaten for the longest period of time, as our ancestors did. Or some people think it's ketogenic diet is the perfect diet for us. And some people feel better on a vegan diet. Some people feel better on a meat-based diet, and some people feel better on the GAP diet, which has no cereals in it. But no matter which diet you choose, the important thing is that the diet maintains the correct balance of the macrominerals. That means that it's natural for our cells. And so the most natural diet is the one that does not upset the natural balance of the macrominerals. That this means it's low in sodium, high in potassium, is high in magnesium, and does not contain any high calcium foods such as dairy products, and does not contain any potassium depleting factors such as coffee drinking or alcohol consumption or excess sugar intake. So which should be, yeah. Okay, thank you. So which should be the ideal diet? No added salt, minimum amount of cooking, high potassium foods such as the root vegetables or fruits considered as vegetables such as tomatoes, cucumbers, low in animal protein, no milk or dairies, and free from drugs such as aspirins or diuretics or laxatives, and high in magnesium. So I hope this is been helpful to understand how the aging process occurs and how to give the main importance in our choosing of foods if we consider this level of macrominerals. So we can understand better how our cells get energy and maintain vitality. So this is part of the courses I'm giving in nutritional medicine, in which we give a lot of our main focus of the therapy is to maintain the correct balance of the macrominerals.
Thank you very, very much, Elena, for all this interesting information, for sharing your time and your knowledge with us. We've got a lot of questions, so now if you agree, let's start incorporating them to our conversation. Let's start with Alejandro Yanez from the United States. He says, what is the cause of having muscle cramps? Is this because the level of potassium is lower? Thank you very much.
Yes, definitely. This has got something to do with potassium, but also with magnesium and especially with calcium. This is part of the calcium mishandling problem, in which calcium gets deposited in muscles, and that's what makes them go cramp. So potassium helps to move calcium outside this tissue. That's why potassium is important, but the main focus should be on calcium. So maybe you should reduce calcium-rich foods and also maybe think of taking magnesium supplements, and potassium. But potassium is something that normally you obtain from diet. You don't obtain potassium from supplements. You obtain it from diet, like drinking juices, vegetable juices, drinking soups, because the water in which you cook vegetables is very high on potassium, and that should be the main focus. And also one important thing is that people think bananas are high in potassium, and that's not true. That's a myth. Bananas have a good ratio of sodium to potassium. That means they don't have so much sodium, but they're not really high on potassium.
Thank you very much, Elena. Let's continue with Susana Lozano. She's asking from Mexico, and she says, I love soy sauce. Is it low in sodium, or is it still too much for our bodies? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so soy sauce is one of the most high on sodium foods, and if you take too much of it, you may end up with a sodium problem. So maybe sodium sauce is something you should take very rarely or just occasionally. And one important thing as well here is when people crave these salty foods like soy sauce or miso or salty nuts and things like that, it's because you're already developing a sodium imbalance. Because when you have an imbalance, the body starts craving salt. So one thing is that you think something is nice because it's salty, but once your body starts getting rid of sodium and you start getting used to foods that are not salty in savor, then you realize that your body starts rejecting these very salty flavors.
We've got a Spanish question, so if you agree, I'm reading it in Spanish and after that I'm translating it to English. Javier Fernández desde España dice: aunque intento e intento, voy al gimnasio, como bastante, etc., no consigo ganar masa muscular. Me gustaría conseguirlo sin tener que recurrir finalmente a productos químicos. ¿Qué alimentos o suplementos podría recomendarme? In English now. Even though I try, I go to the gym, I eat a lot, I cannot gain muscle mass. I would like to achieve this without having to resort to chemicals. What foods or supplements do you recommend me?
Well, this is a very tricky question because it depends on a lot of things, but maybe you should take amino acids instead of taking protein. Maybe you have a problem with the digestion of proteins and you're not getting enough amino acid, or you're not getting all the amino acids you need. So either take amino acids or take digestive enzymes, which are going to help you to digest protein better, so you'll get a better supply of amino acids. So maybe this is a digestion problem that you have, and maybe you should start taking, as I said, the enzymes or the amino acids.
Caroline from the United States asks: what diseases can cause a lack or excess of potassium in our organisms?
Diseases that can cause, you said, yeah. Well, this is diabetes, for example, is a disease that causes high sodium and low potassium. And any problem with the kidneys, any problem that makes you lose fluids, that is gonna affect the macrominerals. But it's not so much diseases that cause losses of potassium, but maybe practices. I mean, a lot of drugs cause a lot of potassium. As I said, aspirins or diuretics, laxatives as well. So we have to be careful with the drugs and with lifestyle factors such as drinking too much alcohol, drinking too much coffee, taking too much sugar. So in diabetes, as I said, or any problems related to the metabolism of sugars has something to do with potassium as well.
Thank you very much, Elena. Let's continue. We've got two similar questions coming from different locations of the world, so I'm reading both of them. Lisbeth from Cuba says: is it true that by being vegan, we put our health at risk due to a lack of nutrients? And Sara Luna from YouTube and from the USA says: I am vegetarian and I don't eat the right food to get all the vitamins. What do you recommend, like vitamins or vitamin powders, to put our bodies back in a healthy balance? Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I think you should make sure you're eating enough protein, because that's one of the main maybe mistakes that people make when they vegan or vegetarian, that they forget about the protein. And in vegan and vegetarian diets, it's not so easy to find ready to eat proteins, such as, and some people use maybe cheese or dairy products because they are very easy to find and you don't need cooking. But maybe you should find several sources of good quality protein. I think that's very important. The other thing is that you may be in lack of vitamin B12. So although some vegetarian and some vegan foods have some vitamin B12, I recommend that you take a vitamin B supplement and that you take a B complex, not just the B12, but a B complex, because if you take just B12, you may end up having another deficiency of another B vitamin because they are antagonists. So if you take vitamins B, they should be in a team. They should be together. They should be all of them, because otherwise you may get another imbalance. And if you don't take vitamin B12, you may feel all right. You may think this is okay, I feel great. But the problem with vitamin B12 is that the deficiency occurs over the long term. So you may not realize until it's too late. So some people develop a B12 deficiency after 10 or 20 years of being vegan, and then it's too late to feel the resources. I mean, we have like well, we have a pool of vitamin B12 that we're driving from, and one day it gets empty. So just make sure you have your vitamin B12 with the B complex.
Elena, let's really quick answer two questions more. Susana Lozano from YouTube asks you, what should women reaching their 40s add to our diets when we start seeing grey hair and wrinkles?
Well, the main thing is stop having salt in your diet. That's the main thing and the most important, and the one that you're going to really feel the difference. But this is something that you don't do from one day to another. It's not something that you just do. Let's say tomorrow you're not eating any more salt at all. That's very difficult because salt is everywhere, and because your taste is got used to the salty flavor. So you need to do this little by little, like going down some step. So you just start reducing salt, just having some foods that you don't put any salt in, and then other foods that you put salt, and you start feeling the difference. And one day you realize that you don't need salt anymore. But this is something that has to come with a natural process that you get adapted to. And also very important that you drink a lot of vegetable juices. This is very, very important, and that you eat a lot of raw food. So just make sure you have maybe 40% of your diet, which is raw, maybe juices, vegetable juices, because this is very high on sodium. Very high on potassium. So you're gonna counterbalance the sodium. So the juices give you enzymes, they give you vitality, they give you energy, and the sodium cooks you. That's what sodium does. It cooks. It makes you wrinkled, and it makes you age. If you have, let's say, some raw meat and you put some sodium in it, you see how it cooks. It cooks. I mean, you cook food just by putting salt in it. So just think of your body that you don't want it to get wrinkled with salt. So just get rid of salt, but do it step by step. Don't do it from one day to another.
Let's finish with another Spanish question. So, as I did before, I'm reading it in Spanish and after that I'm translating it to English. Germán desde España pregunta, ¿podríamos sustituir el sabor de la sal con alguna otra especia similar en nuestras comidas? Could we substitute the salt flavor with some other similar spice in our meals? And I really understand this question, Elena, because I love salt, and this is going to be very difficult for me as well.
Yes, I that's a very good question. Thank you, because I forgot about that. Yes, sure. I mean, to get rid of salt in your diet or in your taste buds, you need to use very strong flavors, different flavors. So we have a very wide range of flavors. It's not only salty. We have spicy, we have pungent, we have vinegars, we have mustard. So you start using things like raw ginger, raw garlic, pepper, all types of pepper, raw herbs such as coriander, basil, mint. Just use a lot of flavors in your food, and maybe you could use different sauces and prepare sauces, one with mustard, one with basil, with dry tomatoes, with garlic, and just make your taste buds go active by these different flavors. Okay, so it's not a question of having a food that doesn't taste of anything, that is just boring and doesn't taste of anything. Just change salt with these very strong flavors, and little by little you realize that you're forgetting about salt. But this has to be something natural, something normal, something that it just happens one day, and maybe it took a whole year, but in the end you're eating rice and you didn't put any salt in it, and you had some, but you had a lot of pepper, and you had a lot of maybe cumin, curry. I mean, there's a lot of spices, there's a lot of flavors to use, and maybe one day you realize that you just forgot about salt, and your body feels better, you're not so bloated, you don't have any water retention, your eyes are not puffy, all these things that come from water retention.
All right, so now we've got no more time left. Thank you very much, Elena, for being with us today. It has been a real pleasure having you here, and I hope to see you very, very soon. I want you to feel really happy about this conference because they join us from different countries like Mexico, Spain, Cuba, the United States, the United Kingdom, or Argentina. Thank you very much. And as I said, I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Dalai, and thank you everyone for listening and for being here. Thank you.
And to you, dear friends of Mindalia, I just want you to remember that you can join us through our different channels or platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, VK, and Vaun Life. We also want to remind you that you can enjoy all our content in Mindalia Radio, 24 hours of conscious content. And you can find this in our website, www.mindaliaradio.com. Before saying goodbye, we also want to remind you that Mindalia.com is a non-profit organization. You can collaborate with us by liking our content, leaving us a positive comment, subscribing to our channel or different platforms, as I said before, and of course by sharing this video with someone else. Finally, if you want, you can donate through a link you will find in our website, www.mindalia.com. By doing so, you help us to keep creating more content like the one you enjoyed with us today. Having said that and feeling really grateful, we are ready to say goodbye, but just for now, until a next Mindalia live streaming.